Welcome to this third overview, slide 005. This video, this third overview, is going to be a little more personal. I'm introduced my nickname here, Graypaw, and as you'll see later, that's my nickname as a grandfather. And I'm going to speak really as the poppers. I'm going to speak from this idea of having a theater of toy physics, in which an alien view is presented, an alien view from the contemporary story of physics that we have. In this slide 010, I talk about Graypaw as my nickname as a grandfather. And I took that from a series of lucid dreams way back in the summer of 2004, in which my great-grandfather in the dream, he had that nickname, Graypaw. And he cajoled me into asking myself 4 questions that have guided this work. And later we'll see those 4 questions. In slide 015, you see where this overview number 2 ended, where the previous one ended, and this one will pick up. And you see below a foundational book that is not fantasy, that's a toy physics book. And in the top, it supports the theater of toy physics, which is a future fantasy that's planned. And poppers are the fantasy humanoids from 3R space. That's the toy physics universe that is most like ours. 3R space exhibits behavior that's aligned with behavior observed in our universe in modern physics. In slide marked 020, you'll see that this work springs from a personal commitment made a long time ago in 2003. Back then, I vowed to express to my grown children and to their children and on down the line what I've come to believe about us, about people and this universe, based on my long years of study and career work with physics, computer science, and applied mathematics. Intense study and technical work like I did in my educational years and then in my career years can really create sort of a wall of isolation between a person and their family. And coming to the end of my career, or near the end in my mid-50s, I really decided that I just had to do something about that. The chimenea there with the fire growing strong is used in these slides to represent relational intuition. And later we'll talk about that. That's really the fuel for this effort. That's what I brought in to this effort from my career, mainly was relational intuition. In slide 025, we see that the effort went way deeper than expected. There's no expectation of doing this deep technical work of toy physics that ended up with interpretations that are really alien to contemporary story. As expressed in the bottom of this slide, the book is factual. The toy physics work is factual. It's about an expanding relation space web that behaves like the real thing with all of the special relativity and behavior of modern physics. But it leads to beliefs that are just alien to contemporary thought. So this video traces out how that happened, how it came to the point of Graypaw being a popper, how I came to those alien beliefs based on the geometric interpretations of toy physics. Slide 03030 here summarizes the transformative popper beliefs, and transformative is more powerful than informative because transformative implies that it has the potential to really change the way you look at things, the way you perceive yourself, other, and the things around us in this world. There are 3 listed there, so we'll take them one at a time. It looks pretty busy, but let's just take them one at a time. The first one is that our universe is a web-like container. It's called a relation space. It's a container of participants joined in collective behavior. That's a little different from our inherited concept that our world is made of parts in composition. It's more accurate to think of them as participants joined in collective behavior, and we'll see that through this video. The point is, with the little yellow starburst above that, is that it's a legitimate container with absolute locations, and that's radically different from contemporary physics. it's comforting to realize that this relation space concept gives us the same kind of view of our universe that our ancestors have had, that we live in a container and that we are each have our own place. The number 2 there, every material thing, every atom has an embodied inner deep behavioral dimension. This is the 4th dimension. Contemporary story says the 4th dimension is time. But this story says, no, it's an inner behavioral dimension. It isn't a pointing dimension where you can point toward it or aligned with it. It is rather a dimension of depth. It's inside. And the Popper universe tells them that it's as deep as the stars are far away. If there were stars in that toy universe, then the depth within each atom would be as deep as the stars are far away. And also that embodied inner behavioral depth is the sort of like called the spinal body. It's the body by which the atom is located in the container. So this expands on, it's a web-like container where everything has its place, but also everything is deeply connected through that inner dimension of depth. And all atoms connect to a common source, a center in the beginning, in the center of the web. So that's the second one, and the little starburst above it says that that point is a spiritual point. If you think of deep, common inner participation that occurs within everything, then that's a spiritual thought when we bring it to our own experience as human beings. And the third point, that primal expansion within each atom, away from the common center. So each atom expands that dimension inside, away from the common center, and through doing so, through that primal expansion, an energetic-like substance is brought in to the inner dimension of each atom and flows out in the manner of what we think of as fields. It's that flow of substance comes into the inner portion, flows out in the sensory dimensions, and is the carrier of the fields that we know of in ordinary physics. So those are the 3 main points, and that third point relates to the space-time story of contemporary story. That space-time continuum story technically applies, you can apply it in this relation space context, in the toy physics context. But there it is shown to be terribly flawed. So there's an alternate mathematics that gives a real clear understanding of what happens. The space-time mathematics is technically correct, but it gives a terribly flawed picture of what's actually going on. So that's a summary of what we're going to lay out. We're going to lay out a path for getting to this point where we have these 3 main transformative beliefs that come out of the mathematics of toy physics. And now in slide 035, we get to the beginning of the story of how this gets there. In the beginning of the fall of 2004, there was a huge shift of service mission that I experienced from out there to in here. In engineering, engineering serves a mission of out there material-centric measurement, prediction, and control. By out there, I mean, you can think of it as out there in the space around us. We measure, predict, and control things. And in that year, 2004, I entered a master's degree program in social work. I was 57 years old, and that shift is to a different mission entirely. That mission is an in-here mission, behavior-centric, and it's more about people and their sensation, perception, and choice mechanisms. So you see here the depiction of engineering there. That double tree really represents physics and applied mathematics. They are like two entwined trees that grew up together so closely that their roots and their branches are entwined. So you'll see these symbols for engineering and social work, or for physics and applied mathematics, and for social work throughout the slides that you see in this video. Slide 040 describes the effort during social work studies from 2004 to 2006. It was to translate knowledge from modern physics using relational intuition from career experience. And the translation was from that out there material-centric need with language that supports reliable methods for measurement, prediction, and control. That's the engineering mission with its own language. Translate from there to that in here need that is behavior-centric. And behavior-centric need in that yellow bubble you see is considered to be a vital spiritual need. You can think of the out there need as our material needs and the in here need as a spiritual need. The objective was to translate into language that supports inner sensation, perception, and choice about self, other, and belonging. And that translation should be socially accepted, it should be scientifically authentic, and it should be compassionate. So that was the mission taken during social work studies. Back then, there was no intention to question the mathematics of modern physics. There was no intention to go into the mathematics like we ended up actually doing later. In slide 45, we see what was carried reluctantly into social work studies from that career in applied mathematics and engineering. So we see those twin trees there, entwined story trees. That's the way I think of them, physics and applied mathematics. Up in the branches, you have all of these stories, and down in the roots, you have the conceptual foundations. And those are entwined between mathematics and physics. Well, up in the branches, we have mathematics, and specifically for me, that means geometry of mathematical spaces. I was ended up being a tenured professor at the University of Toronto, and that was my specialty. Physics up in the branches is about equations that mimic properties and behavior of material. That can be also classified for me as vector space geometry. Not that we'll get into that, but that's a label. And down in the roots of math and physics, we have sets composed of elements. That's the basic bottom level beginning story of math. And in physics, it's objects composed of parts. And for me, my experience with down in the roots was with relational mathematics. But I used relational mathematics in industry, applying that to industrial behavior. And from that industrial experience, which was over 14 years or so using relational mathematics applied to industrial operations, I gained a certain relational intuition. Didn't quite realize that until much later, but looking back on how this all happened, that was the case. I gained relational intuition from my mathematical experience and from using that in an industrial setting with real down-to-earth equipment running and organizations producing materials. I like this slide 050. It depicts the life during the social work years. And it wasn't all study. There was a lot of creative work going on there, a lot of fun. If you look to the left and you see that relation space part where it says way back then, those are wooden words, and you'll see those come up in this work. But that idea of a space of relations was in my head way back before going into social work. And there you see that burning chimenea there. That's the relational intuition symbol. That was burning during then, and I was busy doing lots of work with wood. You can see there on the left was an arch made in an apartment, and the little part on the top is a stand that held one of the stands. There were two of them that held the arch. And a crib for my first grandchild, and it's been used for all of the grandchildren. And on the right, you see what's called the birdhouse. It was a meditation hut built in the mountains, built in Louisiana and taken up to the mountains of Colorado. And that was the center of this work. That birdhouse was the center of this work. from those early years all through 2019. So there was a lot of good times during the social work years. Here's another busy looking slide in slide 055. This really gets to the gray X spirit. I think of gray paw as just a one example of a name that could connotate concern for our great grandchildren. And that spirit was alive during MSW studies, Master of Social Work Studies. This slide gives the 4 guiding questions that came up during that summer of 2004. But what I want to do first is just go through the pictures. The pictures below, at the bottom of this slide, are really just family pictures, and it emphasizes that this work is in support of family, generational storytelling. So this is a story that I'm trying to tell down the generations in my family and for all generations that come after us. The top pictures come really from the first introductory overview. That spinner, you'll recall, has 3 nodes. One of them is physicality, another one is spirituality, and the third one is reality. So, those things spin into a blur in our daily lives. The 3 little guys trying to pull a triangle together represent the effort to try to pull that stories of physicality from their measurement, prediction, and control mission, try to pull that over into the mission of sensation, perception, and choice so that it comes together with spiritual story. We have our little guy with a telescope and a graduation cap trying to see into the future. And the picture on the right with the triangle that's come together just emphasizes that we're trying to embrace what is good here. We're trying to bring story of physicality together with story of spirituality into something that is healthy and good for the children that come after us. So now if we look at the 4 questions, these are those 4 guiding questions that came in that lucid dream. Let's look at the 4th one that has a little yellow blur there that emphasizes number 4. That was the strangest question. Has anyone ever seen a thing? And that really ties to relational intuition, as we'll see, because the answer to that that is in my heart is no. No one has ever or will ever see a single thing. No, everything is relational. Everything is about joining. So, and we'll see more about that in a minute. The 3 questions are these, and these were in that lucid dream where my gray paw, this character within me, had me ask these questions. The first one is, what kind of place is this that we're immersed in? What is this universe? What kind of place is it? And the second one is, what are we making of what the great minds of science have said? It doesn't ask, what did the great minds of science say? It asks, what are we making of what they said? And then the third question is a similar question about the great minds of spirit. What are we making of what the great minds of spirit have said? And those 4 questions have guided this work since the very beginning. As slide 060 shows, translation seemed really easy and natural during those 2 social work years. It followed a emperor has no clothes kind of observational story. And it was demonstrated in a children's story. The idea was to try to translate into a story that was clear enough to tell a child at bedtime. So it was a translation from knowledge in those story trees of measurement, prediction, and control, and translated over into a common sense relevant story unleashed from that language. And it utilized relational intuition. So it translated from a social need that was out there, measurement, prediction, control, to the social need that is in here, sensation, perception, and choice. In slide 065, you see how that story was named. Emily's relatives, but it was pronounced relatives. So it was playing on the idea of relation. And in the story, Grandpa revealed to Emily a relational family secret. So the story was about the universe and about joining, about the fact that things join together. In the story, the atom was thought of as or told to Emily as an example of something that thought it was oneliness, and the universe was something that it thought was onlyness, and so forth. The story was about loneliness and about self-other and belonging, about a feeling of not belonging. And it was about family, Emily, Sarah, Ben, and Grandpa. I took this independent studies course, which was Social Work 7905. I took it in the final semester to write up that translation story and to defend the translation work as far as its social work relevance, and to demonstrate it with that story. So you see the title at the bottom. I actually recorded the story with an MP3 file, and it's a pretty good story even today. I have a Word copy of the report to that course, but that's not so good. It's flawed, and that's a whole part of the story of why this kept going after social work, why this effort didn't stop there. There's one of my wooden words that I like to make. You see in slide 07070, the word relation, and there's no visual effects in that. That's a straight up picture. It's all about joining. Relation is all about joining. The mathematical relation is about symbols or numbers joined in Cartesian composition. Now, it doesn't matter if you are interested in that or not. Symbols and numbers are joined in composition. That's a mathematical relation. And every equation expresses a mathematical relation. So the equation of physics are mathematical relations. Relational intuition is something different. The problem that encountered back at the end of social work was that the reasoning in that social work 7509 report was flawed. It took a long time to understand it. But what I finally understood was that the relational intuition that I gained by applying relational mathematics to problems in industrial production, those 14 years of work back in the career, that relational intuition that I gained is not actually supported by relational mathematics. Relational mathematics was used to formulate data structures and so forth. But the relational intuition isn't actually supported by the mathematical relation. And frankly, that was a total shock to me at the time. At the end of writing that report, when I went back to try to support what I was saying with relational mathematics, I came to the shocking truth that my relational intuition had sort of strayed away from the literal concept of a mathematical relation. Looking over slide 75, I want to kind of give a description now of what happened at the end of social work. It led to dissonance at the time. Of course, being with young people at my age, 50-something, being with 20-somethings brought me back to some questions that I had when I was that age. I was especially interested in physics at that time, so my questions a lot had to do with the strangeness of light, for example, and the relativistic behavior that was so confusing, and a lot of physics questions that I was brought back into. But the experience with finding that my mathematical background, which I thought was so solid, didn't really serve me in that story that I told, caused me to think that something is missing in the conceptual roots of mathematics and physics. Now, that's really kind of a crazy thought. There's some dark humor in there. If you think back then, I was studying social work, and all of us social workers had to take a course of using the DSM-5. That's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The fact is that if I had come to any counselor at that time and said that because of my trouble supporting this story that I was telling about Emily's relatives, that because of that, I thought something was missing in the conceptual roots of mathematics and physics, any counselor in their right mind would have given me that diagnosis. Delusional disorder, grandiose type, 297.1, end of story. So fortunately, it turned out that I believe there is something missing in the roots of physics, and we'll talk about that. Also, at the time, I had come to believe, because of these stories, they seemed to lead the translations that I had done in the story of Emily's relatives, led me to believe that atoms must somehow join on the inside. And that's a crazy belief, too, according to contemporary story. So also the other bubble in there, space-time. I had studied space-time when I was at the University of Toronto as a tenured professor. I worked with Ian McCausland, who was, Professor McCausland was eminently involved in the controversy of space-time and special relativity. And I had talked to him about that, tried to understand it, couldn't understand it. So all of these things created the situation where I realized I had to do more foundational work to get to a point of feeling like I was on solid ground. The pictures in slide 80 really give me the feel of those years, those seasons of contemplation from 2006 to 2011. The one on the left with the twin trees, those represent mathematics and physics, so closely entwined that the roots and the branches are all meshed together. And the other two pictures are of a meditation hut that I built in Louisiana during the years of social work studies. And I put them up in the mountains in Colorado in a place that we had during that period of time. Those two pictures, one of them shows it in the summer and the other is in the winter when it's covered with snow. I went through those seasons going to that place a number of times. The taproots of mathematics and physics, this was an essential realization during that time, that the taproots of mathematics and physics are really, it's like one taproot that is in different words. Under math, we have sets composed of elements, and under physics, we have material composed of parts. Now, those words are different, and the material of the ideas are different. One is symbols, and other is material. But essentially, it's the same idea. And, they grew up together. They came from the same place, the same ideas that our ancestors had about this world around us. They thought that it was parts in composition, and the corresponding mathematics that grew started with sets made of elements. So that all is a little bit suspicious, because there's something missing in that. That's the same taproot using different words. And that idea was what was contemplated for a long time. And finally, something emerged from that. And that's a point to be made. That emerged from inner ideas that come up from within. They come up from that depth, I believe. This brings us in slide 85 to the first transformational concept of Popper's, and the one that we mentioned in the preview. There you see it is the picture of a wooden word, relation. The physical relation is a concept that came out of those seasons of contemplation, and it means joint collective behavior of participants. It's that counterpart to the contemporary idea and to our basic inherent sensation that we live in a place where there's composition of parts. Well, this is a behavioral definition of the same kind. And the behavioral definition of a thing is a physical relation. It's joined behavior of participants. And when you think about it, every part you can think about is, in fact, a participant, by virtue of the fact that physics has told us that the atom itself is a cauldron of behavior on the inside. It is a participant through gravity, if nothing else. So everything made of atoms, although we think of it as maybe an objective thing made of parts, it is also at the same time a behavioral thing that consists of participants participating together to form what the thing is. A thing is what it is by virtue of the behavior of its participants. This is an alternate meaning of the overused word thing, and it's much more precise meaning. If you think of a thing as a physical relation, then it encompasses much more than thinking of a thing as a objective material thing. And this applies, this idea of participants in collective behavior applies all the way from a single atom, which is a cauldron of participation on the inside, to a human being. We have deep human consciousness. So the idea of a physical relation is the first transformational concept that came out of those years of trying to figure out what went wrong with the story of Emily's relatives, trying to support it with mathematics. Slide 90 really serves to bring this idea of a physical relation into focus as it pertains to a mathematical relation. And the story is that the mathematical relations, which are measurement prediction equations, at least if we're talking about physics, mathematical relations mimic physical relations, which is the real thing. The reality is there. Physical relation is joined behavior of participants. And that exists apart from any descriptions, equations, or recipes about that. It exists. And that's true of atoms, of objects, of gravity. Gravity is a physical relation. It exists. We've discovered it through our work, measurement prediction work. We've discovered that it is a physical relation, that the planets join in collective behavior. And the mathematical relations of physics give us recipes for measuring and predicting that reality of the physical relation called gravity. The validated equations of physics, the mathematical relations, those reveal and confirm the important physical relations and participants around us. But those are descriptive. They mimic the reality. And so that's where the relational intuition came from, is for dealing with the reality in an industrial context of physical relations. So in industrial work, I used the mathematical relations to gather data, to form descriptions, and to work as an aid in trying to understand the real thing, and that is the running equipment, the organization of people, the weather, the participants in the way a production facility works. So that's a really crucial realization that the reality exists there in the behavior. And physics does not really give us a taproot concept of that, of primal behavior. Now, just to expand on that a bit about the reflection that got there, on looking screen 95, it really came from Emperor's New Clothes kind of interpretation of the particle physics parade. An atom is not a composition of objective parts. It's a physical relation. It's a cauldron of collective inner behavior. Now, we have I think, language momentum from our historical idea of reductionism that has caused the physics community to use the term particle. They continue with the language of parts and composition. The word particle is a misnomer. Particle physics is really a study of participants joined in primal behavior. To poppers, these fantasy creatures from the toy physics universe, the word thing means a physical relation. Participants joined in collective behavior. And that includes every material thing and more. It includes every material object, but the physical relation is very inclusive. Participants may be distant from each other. Gravity is this kind of thing. It's a physical relation, collective behavior, with material participants that are separate from each other. They're separated in space. And so the idea of a physical relation, when you use thing in that way, then a thing called love makes sense. It has participants. And so you can ask, well, what are the participants of this physical relation? Just as you ask, what are the parts of this object? The difference between asking what are the parts of this object and what are the participants of this relation is that participants, identifying them can expand outwards to include a bigger and bigger range of things, where material asking of what are its part is a reduction, gets smaller and smaller. In this slide, slide 105, we're going to talk a little more about this idea of parts in composition together with the idea of participants joined in collective behavior, because the two things really go together when you're talking about material. The old reductionist quest said that if you had an object, a piece of material, then it could be broken down into smaller objects and then smaller parts and so on until you finally get to the bottom level parts that cannot be broken down. And those are the fundamental parts of our universe. So the idea is that there's a set of fundamental parts of which everything is composed. Well, the atom was thought to be that. And, you know, there's an array of atoms. The periodic chart shows all of the different kinds of atoms. We thought of those maybe as parts in the beginning, but it turns out that, as we all know, that an atom can be broken, but it doesn't give you smaller parts after that, even though they use this bogus word particle. What you get when you break an atom is behavior. You get this release of behavior, and it's those inner participants that are basically being released. Well, you might think, well, okay, if we're talking about an object and we think of it in terms of participants and participation, then you might think we could reduce it as well. Say, well, let's identify the participants. But in fact, identification of participants is often an expansion. For example, with gravity, if we look at a rock and we say, okay, gravity is a thing, and we look at a rock and say, what is that thing? Well, the participants in gravity is going to expand to all of the other rocks around it, and the earth and the sun and so forth. So neither one of those things, parts or participants, can be reduced in that way. And one way to resolve that is, as far as perception, we perceive them at the same time. If you look at the human body, you can think of the heart as an object. It's parts joined in composition, or you can think of it as a participant. The beating heart participates in life, and those two merge. There's sort of a reverberating duality in that existence. So that gets to a deep idea. We've always thought, science has always thought, that material exhibits behavior. But modern physics, as it went deeper and deeper, it really shows us that, you know, behavior manifests material as well. So they kind of exist as a reverberation. Material exhibits behavior, behavior manifests material. And that is the essence of it. So that's a little deep, but that is definitely something to ponder, and poppers understand it in that way. In slide 110, we see the second transformational concept of material, and that is in-here depth. In poppers, they say that the in-here depth is as deep as the stars are far away. One of the things about atoms that we have learned from modern physics is that they are an embodiment of behavior that is located within an out there space around us, around the atom. And that is true also of people. We have an embodied in here deep behavior consciousness. And through that consciousness and that deep behavior, we join as a participant in the out there space of pointing dimensions around us. The strength of the toy physics demonstration in its mathematics, it makes it legitimate to say that embodied in here behavior is a dimension of deep behavior, in the same sense that time in space-time is a dimension. That's the story of normal contemporary physics. So to state it here again, the second concept is that there's an embodied in here dimension of deep behavior that joins as a participant in the out there space of pointing dimensions around us. If you think about that, that is true all the way from the smallest atom to the human being. In the atom, there's this cauldron of inner behavior that participates in gravity and other phenomenon. And for the human being, there's this deep inner consciousness by which we join in perception and in expression with the things around us. Now, this is, again, transformative versus informative. This kind of thinking takes time to soak in. It takes practice to bring to realization. But doing so can transform the way you think about self, other, and belonging. In slide 115, we see that a lingering question that has lingered for a long time finds new life. And my favorite times that I recall during this time of work from 2003 on through now are those times when key insight has bubbled up from a dream or through a series of dreams in the case of Graypaw, the soccer ball dream here, or insight that bubbles up on the edge of sleep. As you're going toward the edge of sleep, there's sort of a surf that you go through where you can be alert and quiet and still attentive to thoughts, but where your body has eased down into a sleep kind of condition. And insight can really bubble up there. And also that's just a form of meditation. So meditation can do the same thing. The question that had lingered way back then, is this: could separate atoms somehow be joined on the inside? That seems impossible if you think of in terms of material. So could a material thing be on the inside of every atom? No. But having the physical relation idea sink in to where it's an issue of participants. The soccer ball dream visually illustrated that there could be a common participant in the behavior of each atom. The soccer ball is like, it has facets, as you can see from that little picture of a soccer ball. And in the dream, each facet was like the skin of a conga drum. And from that conga drum skin facet, there was a chamber that went down and got smaller and down to the center region that is common to all of the facets of the soccer ball. And so participation within that common center could be a participant within the collective behavior of separate atoms. So that was a visual idea, and that's depicted down on the bottom. I just drew this one up where there's something in the center of that circle that appears as a participant or that engages in the collective behavior of separate atoms. The one on the right is just a higher dimensional, so that's like a sphere, and you can see two little chambers going down to a center region in that one too. So a single participant in the center can be common to all distant surface facets. Well, this realization and that answer that separate atoms could be joined on the inside in this way, then that sent me down the slippery slope into the flatland, sphereland entrance ramp that I talked about in the previous video. Slide 120 illustrates how these thoughts brought me to Dionys Berger's Circle Land. In the right, you see a circle, or on the left, you see these two circles that represent Circle Land. I started thinking about what would an atom look like in Circle Land, and so you imagine them as you see in those pictures on the left. And the early idea was that atoms join on the inside through by being connected to the common center, and also through having participation from one atom to the other. That was a really rough idea, and it led to the right, as you see, it led eventually to the idea of a web that's inside Circle Land. The boundary circle around the web is not part of the web. That just illustrates that Circle Land can be thought of, the story of Circle Land can be thought of as a boundary within which the web fits. And we've seen that the Circle Land idea cannot be true of our universe, but the web idea, it's not restrained by the Kobe satellite experiment that shows that light travels flat. I've talked about that before. So this illustrates how went down the slippery slope into Circle Land, by Dionysius and discovered that the inside could be a web. And from there, we ended up in toy physics. And finally, we come to the third transformational concept of material that comes out of toy physics. And that's of primal expansion, which drives all behavior. You see in that web a depiction of a radial element, that black element coming up from the center. That's the spinal body of an atom, that radial element. You've seen it before, I think, but R space, that symbol just stands for relation space. So these are R space universes, and this is the one with just one pointing dimension. It's a one-dimensional universe as far as motion. And it has a radial spinal body. All of them do, this one and the higher dimensional ones. That radial spinal body expands outward from the center at the speed of light. So we just calibrate it to say that it expands at our speed of light that we experience and measure. And that outward expansion causes an influx of primal substance. It's like a flux called R flux. And it's very, that's primal material, primal substance. And that influx has that form of Einstein's energy equation, m times the speed of light squared. In toy physics, this is very rigorous. We're just depicting a little picture here that illustrates it. And that influx is a flow of energy that is allocated for different purposes. It supports web growth. This is an expanding web. As the primal expansion goes, then so does the entire web. The sensory distances increase in the web. So it supports web growth, and it supports participation in collective behavior with other atoms. And it propels motion and compression. So the energy that we see in modern physics, the poppers don't see it in the same way we do. We have the same equations and the same behavior, but to poppers, energy flows into each atom from primal expansion, and it flows outward in the sensory directions to be a carrier for the things that we call fields, like light and gravity and so forth. Of course, this is a very simplistic depiction, and really the toy physics universes and atoms are very simple compared to real atoms, but the behavior, as we've said before, is astonishingly well aligned. The mathematics of a dynamic web like this with an inner dimension of behavior that it expands is not the same mathematics as in actual physics. It's a variation. It's a variation, for one thing, of the Pythagorean, utilization of the Pythagorean theorem. It's a variation of the ideas of Descartes with his Cartesian coordinates. And so with this, we've introduced the third transformational concept. And so we have all three now. The first one being the physical relation concept of participants joined in collective behavior. Then the second one was the inner concept of embodied inner dimension of depth participating in the outer expanse. And this third one is the concept of primal expansion that drives all behavior and causes distances in the universe to expand. The final slide, 130, just points to the next video, which will give graphic demonstrations of some of the mechanics. And the mathematics here is really depicted as mechanics through props. So we'll see the mechanics of web growth through radial primal expansion. And so we'll see the mechanics of Pythagorean resource allocation, which is the alternative interpretation of the Pythagorean theorem that is so vital in rigorously defining an inner dimension that is not a pointing sensory dimension.